The Corps had been silent for as long as anyone had kept records, and we had been keeping records for a long time. I pulled up the station's intake log on my first morning, back at outpost Verith 9, and read through the access attempts, the way a doctor reads an old chart methodically without hope. 41 entries across 2 centuries, fleet admirals, a sitting high consul, 3 separate delegations from the Covenant of Aligned Worlds, a xenolinguist who had devoted her career to cracking the signal's repeating pattern and flew out personally with a decryption rig the size of a cargo pallet. Every one of them had placed a hand on the vault housing or spoken to it, or run current through it, or played the signal back at it through an amplifier. Every one of them had been met with nothing. Not a flicker. Not a fluctuation in the broadcast. The core just sat there in its cryovault, fist-sized and faintly luminous, pulsing its 11-second message outward into the dark the way a heart pumps blood. Automatically, indifferently, without acknowledgement of anyone in the room. My name is David Course. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a deep-range signals technician before my knees went. And the only reason I was back at Verith 9 at all was that Fleet Command had finally authorized the decommission and wanted someone who remembered the station's original wiring to oversee the salvage. They sent me a Safine on, and I brought Sarah because she needed the field hours, and because she was the best reader of old equipment I had ever trained. She was 24. She had grown up on a colonial farming settlement 3 systems out, the kind of place where you fix the harvester yourself or you don't eat. She had calloused hands and a habit of going very quiet when she was thinking. And she had never once asked to be anywhere important. The alien ship arrived on our 3rd day. I picked it up on passive scan before it entered the moon's shadow. A long vessel, dark-hulled, moving at the careful speed of something that has traveled very far and does not want to make a mistake now that it is close. I ran the configuration against the registry and found nothing. I ran it against the diplomatic contact archive and found a partial match to a deep-range explorer class that 3 separate survey teams had reported at the edge of charted space over the past 60 years. Always moving inward, always on the same heading. Following the signal. They had been following the signal for 600 years, the intercept told me later, seeing a distance that made my eyes water to calculate. I suited up. I opened the bay. 3 of them came down the ramp. They were tall, pale-skinned, with eyes that caught the station's work lights and held them the way a cat's eyes hold a candle. They wore long dark garments that moved like water. They carried nothing. The one in front stopped at the base of the ramp and looked at me with an expression I could only read as exhausted reverence. The face of someone who has carried a question for so long that the question has become load-bearing. "The signal," he said, in accented but clear standard. "We have come." I told him I understood and I led them inside, and I told myself I was not nervous. Sarah was in the vault room when we arrived. She had not heard the ship come in. She had been cataloging the station's secondary relay boards for the better part of the morning, working her way methodically through a cabinet of components so old the insulation had gone brittle. Shot. She had pulled the cryovault open to note its contents for the decommission manifest, and she was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of it, eating a ration bar and reading the Corps' output display on her handheld the way she might read a weather report. Curious, unhurried, Corps was glowing, not the faint ambient luminescence it always carried. It was glowing a deep, warm amber that pulsed in a rhythm I did not recognize as the 11-second broadcast. It pulsed like breathing. The light fell across Sarah's face and across the floor around her in a soft moving circle, and she had not moved from her spot because Sarah, when something interested her, went very still and waited for it to make sense. The tall pilgrim stopped in the doorway. I heard the sound he made, a short, involuntary exhale, the sound of something confirming itself after 6 centuries of uncertainty. 1 step forward. Then he stopped again, and I understood why. The other 2 had caught his arms, not restraining him, steadying themselves. Sarah looked up. "The wiring in this thing is extraordinary," she said. Someone really knew what they were doing. She held up her handheld so I could see the readout. The signal's cycle had changed. It was no longer broadcasting outward. It was cycling inward, turning on itself as if listening. I wasn't touching it, she added, correctly reading my expression. I just sat down next to it. The lead pilgrim crossed the room slowly. He knelt at the edge of the amber light the way a man kneels at the edge of something he has no other language for. He looked at the core. He looked at Sarah. Then he placed both hands flat on the floor and lowered his head. And the other two did the same. Sarah looked at me. I did not have anything useful to tell her. The core's light shifted. The amber deepened, contracted, focused. It was not broadcasting outward anymore. It was attending to the woman's sitting in front of it. Every glyph on its housing that had been dark since the station's founding lit in sequence, slowly left to right, like a sentence being read aloud by something that was choosing its words carefully. Then it spoke. Not through the station's audio system, itself. A tone that I felt in my back teeth and in my sternum, clear and low, and without static. 5 words in standard so clean and precise that I knew they were not translated. The core had held them waiting. You were the signal. The room was quiet for a long time. Sarah set her ration bar down on the floor beside her. She looked at the core. The amber light breathed between them, steady now, patient, and the glyphs on the housing held their positions as if the sentence were still being read. She reached out, slowly, and touched the core's surface with 2 fingers. The same way she touched old equipment she was trying to understand. And it did not go dark. It did not go silent. It simply held the warmth under her hand and waited for whatever came next. I'm from Selen's Rest, she said. I grew up pulling apart broken combines. The lead pilgrim raised his head. There were no tears on his face, but something close to the space where tears would have been. Something worn smooth by a very long time. We know what you are, he said quietly. We have carried your frequency for 600 years. Long before that it carried itself. He paused. 10,000 years, the record says. The signal was already old when our ancestors first heard it. What does it mean? She asked. He looked at her, the way you look at someone who has asked the only honest question in the room. We came here to ask you that, he said. Sarah sat with that. She looked at the core in her hands. She had lifted it without seeming to decide to, the way you pick up something that wants to be held. And the amber light moved through her fingers. She turned it once, slowly, the way she turned circuit boards when she was reading their logic. The glyphs on its housing cycled through their full sequence for the first time. In any recorded observation, all of them, corner to corner, a complete sentence none of us could parse. I had been a signals technician for 31 years. I had spent those years listening at the edge of silence for anything that answered back. I had retired without finding it. I was standing in a decommissioned relay room on a frozen moon, 63 years old, watching a 24-year-old woman from a farming settlement hold 10,000 years of human frequency in her hands. 3 pilgrim astronomers who had crossed the galaxy on a question were kneeling on the floor around her. She did not look like she had found an answer. She looked like she had found the beginning of a very long conversation. Outside, through the station's single observation port, the gas giant turned in its slow, enormous way, and the stars beyond it were the same stars that had listened to the signal for 10,000 years. Patient and indifferent and vast, waiting to see what humanity would say next. Sarah set the core carefully in her lap, both hands around it, and looked at the pilgrim. All right, she said. Start from the beginning.